Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Perhaps the most requested news story I've had this year is right here, and that is from ABC News, but all over the news otherwise. Grand jury recommends Alabama Police Department be immediately abolished. Now, I got a note this morning from somebody who said, Steve, check the story out. And is that something they can do? Well, they can recommend all kinds of stuff. They don't have the power to disband a police department. But it looks like there's going to be some massive overhauls down there. Meredith DeLisa wrote this. An Alabama grand jury has recommended that a city's police department be immediately abolished, finding there's a rampant culture of corruption, officials said recently, while announcing the indictment of 5 officers at that department, including the police chief. 5 Hansville police officers were arrested and charged amid a probe into the department. That's according to the district attorney. The spouse of one of the officers was also charged. So asking yourself who indeed will guard the guards, this grand jury to an extent. This is a sad day for law enforcement, but at the same time, it's a good day for the rule of law, the DA said. He provided limited details on the case, though the investigation encompassed the department's evidence room and the death of a dispatcher who was found dead from an overdose, apparently at work. And they think he OD'd on something out of the evidence room. And there is stuff online that makes this case border on the absurd, including surveillance footage of people leaning through a hole in the wall, apparently in an attempt to recover evidence that they're not supposed to be messing with. So the grand jury found that the Hansville Police Department has failed to account for, preserve, and maintain evidence, and in doing so has failed crime victims and the public at large, making the evidence unusable. And of course, when they're using the evidence for recreation, it kind of eliminates its ability to be used as evidence. The grand jury further found that that death was the direct result of the police department's negligence, lack of procedure, general incompetence, and disregard for human life. And those are the kinds of statements that you don't want to hear made about you and your workplace that you manage. None of the defendants were charged in that man's death, however. The unfettered access that a lot of people had to the evidence room is the basis of the grand jury's finding regarding the dispatcher's death. One of the most concerning things that we discovered in the process is that the police department's evidence room was not secured. And a lot of people who've never sat through a real criminal trial or watched one on TV, which was showing all of the nitty-gritty, is that evidence to be put in and admissible, someone doesn't just walk into court and go, Your Honor, I got this thing. It came from the crime scene. It's admitted. No. So I used to teach trial practice at law school, and you'd spend a lot of time talking about this. So a crime scene investigator finds something at the scene of a crime. That appears to be evidence. They'll often photograph it in place. Then whatever it is will be handled a certain way to preserve it. So let's suppose they found something at the scene like, I don't know, this little lady justice, okay? They find this actual thing is found at the scene of a crime, okay? It's sitting right there on the ground, just trust me. And it turns out it's got something on it that's important. Let's say blood that can be tested, okay? So we don't want to contaminate it. So the first thing we do is we secure it in a way like putting it inside a plastic bag or something. And you seal the bag, and then you take a sticker and you put something on the bag to indicate who found it, where they found it, when they found it, and so on. So it'll often say, address of the location, living room, and then on this date by Officer so-and-so with a date and a time. And then that person will take it and, for instance, return it to the police department and put it in the evidence room. And if somebody then goes and retrieves it to test it for blood, they will take out their own El Marco and write on it and say, retrieved from evidence locker on this date, taken here for testing, and it was tested by this person who took it out of the bag, then put it back into the bag using proper procedures, and all of this stuff is notated, okay? So that when somebody comes into court and goes, Your Honor, we want to put this into evidence, okay? First of all, you wouldn't be handling like this either. You go like this because you got it in a bag. What is it? It's a little lady justice, and one of our witnesses is going to explain that it was found at the scene and go through the chain of custody with us to let us know how it wound up here. And so you'll see them go through this litany of dates and times and who handled it, why. And some of you who remember the O.J. Simpson trial, which was broadcast live, there was a lot of that going on there because they gathered so much evidence at various places, brought it to crime labs and tested it and so on. And so there's a lot of that evidence, but many people forget that or don't really think about that. But if you have an evidence room that is not secure, and you can document that people go into it and come out of it who aren't recorded, or who are removing things without permission, or who are using the evidence for fun, you're going to have problems with every single prosecution you have going forward if there is evidence in that room. And second of all, any conviction that's been had recently using evidence out of that room is suspect right now. So if you were convicted a week before this grand jury returned this, and evidence in your case had been in that room, you probably just got yourself a new trial. So the DA said that the person who OD'd was given access, like a lot of other people, to the evidence room, including on his last day at work. He passed away in August of 2024 with the cause of death determined to be combined effects of a whole variety of chemicals. And the manner of death was accident, according to the state medical examiner's autopsy report. When asked if he'd possibly been exposed to something that was not kept in a secure place, the DA said nothing was secure about the evidence room. And when he was discovered, there was evidence in his office. And of course, his office is not where you keep evidence, you keep it in the evidence room. A municipal judge entered an order Wednesday calling for an audit of the evidence room. Among those charged in here are the police chief, along with a whole bunch of officers. And as noted previously, the wife of an officer was charged with unlawful distribution of a controlled substance and conspiracy to do that. And the problem, of course, was she distributing stuff that was in the normal chain of that commerce, or was it liberated from the evidence room? All charges are felonies except for tampering with physical evidence, which is only a misdemeanor. The charges allege that the defendants mishandled or removed evidence from the evidence room, which is tampering with physical evidence. The employment status of the officers charged was not immediately clear. The defendants surrendered on Wednesday and have since all posted bond, according to the sheriff. Attorney information was not immediately available either. And so that's basically it. So you got a small town, relatively speaking, police force, and among other things, they've got all this evidence in their custody and control. And for whatever reason, they don't have it secure. And so people are going in there and tampering with it and removing it and using it and consuming it, doing all kinds of things that you don't do with evidence, okay? Then one of the guys ODs on it. That's obviously a problem. But you also have the problem with all the people whose cases are coming up, whose evidence, for better or worse, has been tampered with. And right now, you've got a police department that probably was expected to be testifying in a whole bunch of criminal cases going forward, and they can't anymore. They can't. And so as you can imagine, this right here just blasts the foundation out from underneath so many criminal prosecutions. And so the grand jury recommended that the police department be immediately abolished, and their recommendation is noteworthy in that it shows you what they saw, but that's not within their power. Obviously, the police department would be run by the city. The city would have a city council who would be in charge of hiring and firing people. And so what a grand jury does, and I talk about this occasionally because they're not talked about as much as regular juries. And the fact they call it a grand jury, people assume it's a lot like a regular jury. But a grand jury is actually more of an investigative body. So let's suppose that there is a series of crimes happening in an area, and the police can't get anyone to talk. No one will talk. They clam up, and Huggy Bear won't talk either. So they'll convene a grand jury. The grand jury is composed of citizens off the street, just like a jury is. But instead of hearing a trial and then choosing to convict or not convict, they are allowed to issue subpoenas, which the district attorney or prosecutor will handle for them. But they then hear the evidence and then decide if, based on the testimony they've seen, if a crime was committed, and if a crime was committed, who most likely committed it. And if they can draw the conclusion that there was a crime committed most likely by this person, they can then hand down an indictment. That's what they call that. Interestingly, grand juries aren't used as much anymore as they used to be. And it used to be the case that they were fairly common. Crime got committed, and even if they thought they knew who did it, they'd present it to a grand jury would hand down the indictment, boom, there you go. It's not necessary to do it in that manner all the time anymore. However, grand juries are still a great investigative tool because the subpoenas they hand down are a little different. Because quite often what happens is this. The police go out and interview people and they can't get anyone to talk. So the district attorney goes, let's convene a grand jury. They convene a grand jury and they ask the police, who do you think they should talk to? Police go, this person here knows what happened. They know what happened. Grand jury serves them with a subpoena, drags them in, says, tell us what you know. Person goes, I'm not going to talk. Now, here's the thing. If the police department or investigators think that this person knows what happened, but it wasn't them who did it, they can go, oh, here's what we'll do. We'll grant you immunity. We'll grant you immunity. You will not be charged with any crimes arising out of your testimony. Your testimony will never be used in court against you. Now, tell us what you know. And if they still refuse to talk, they can then, the grand jury through the district attorney, can then go to a judge and say, we've got a witness who won't testify, and we've offered them immunity, and they still won't testify. And their argument is obviously the Fifth Amendment. Courts have held that if you've been offered immunity to where you will not be prosecuted for your testimony, you cannot then still hide behind the Fifth. Because by definition, you're not testifying against yourself if it can't be used against you. I know people are going to disagree with that, but I'm just telling you the way things are. If a person in front of a grand jury still wants to clam up, they can, and risk being held in contempt of court, because a judge will order them to testify, and if they don't testify, a judge can say, you, off to jail. And there have been examples of witnesses in some cases who said, I'd rather sit in jail on a contempt charge than testify about what I know and have a bunch of people go to jail or get very, very mad at me, or both. So it's a wild situation that the grand jury apparently saw so much ugliness, they said, just abolish the police department. Like I said, the grand jury doesn't have that power, but I respect them for making the recommendation. But it's a crazy story. ABC News published at Meredith DeLiso wrote it. Grand jury recommends Alabama Police Department be immediately abolished. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Every sunset is an opportunity to reset.